There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
My name is Paul Spana, and I'm the Director of Collections and Curator here at Space Center Houston. The JFK Lectern is the same lectern that was used by President Kennedy for the famous "We're going to the moon" speech.
Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
It was built probably around 1960, maybe the late 50s. It was made by IBM, which is kind of funny, because we think of computers and software and typewriters associated with IBM, and you wouldn't think of something like this high-end piece of furniture coming from a company like IBM. We start seeing it in a lot of photographs starting around 1958, all throughout the 60s. It seemed to be a very popular lectern with corporations and universities. They were used by presidents and senators, congressmen. Some of the individuals would be like Eleanor Roosevelt, Jimmy Carter, Billy Graham used that same lectern all throughout his career. The lectern was gifted to us by Rice University 30 years ago. It was put on display in the Destiny Theater. It's the main theater here at Space Center Houston. And at the beginning of the film that you see, which is an orientation to the history of space exploration, Gene Kranz, the Apollo flight director, is doing a voiceover, and you hear him make note of the podium, the lectern, and a light comes on. And he says, it all began here.
Allow me to direct your attention to the lectern located just to the right of the screen.
All those years in the beginning, it was always on display inside the theater. Last year in 2022 was the 60th anniversary of when President Kennedy gave "We're going to the moon" speech at Rice University. So there's a lot of attention on the lectern, and everybody's picturing that iconic shot of President Kennedy standing behind the lectern. So at that anniversary date, there was a reporter that reached out to us who, on behalf of a JFK historian, questioned whether or not this really was the real lectern. And we said, yes, of course. We knew where it came from. It came directly from Rice. We have the paperwork, the letter that's saying that it was a gift. The story was well known by the employees of Rice University. And the reporter was saying, well, we have evidence that shows otherwise. In the historic photograph, you see a black line around the base, and it's very obvious. I've seen it 1,000 times, never questioned it. I thought it was a shadow line, probably from the railing. But when you look at ours, we don't have that line. And it's not a shadow line from anything else. It's very clear that the bottom section is in two pieces. And I couldn't show you that on the lectern. So with the story coming out and that strong piece of evidence, we thought the best thing to do was remove it from display until we could take a closer look at it. The next step for it was we were already thinking about doing conservation work on the lectern. In this case, a professional conservator who could help us do research and to help learn about it, to find out if this in fact really was the actual lectern that was used by the president.
One of the other things that I've noticed in the initial examination is how this has been set on casters. So you can see the depth of the shadow is much more like the 3/4 of the plywood here, so that they've added these at some point. In fact, when I removed one of the casters, it had still had a sales sticker from Southland Hardware on it. So we know that that was a local repair or modification to make it easier to move this around.
There's a conservator that I knew that worked at the Museum of Fine Arts here in Houston who had worked as a conservator at that museum for 32 years. And he was recommended by the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, so I knew he was the right person for the job.
Here we go, and this would have been able to pivot, but it's missing some components. You can see that there's breakout here. So there's a little cup that would match the little, well, it's called a bullet hinge on each corner. So this is less stable than it should be.
I invited the conservator, Steve Pine, to come out. Steve said, well, have you ever taken it apart? And I said, no, I didn't know it came apart. So he said, well, let's see what happens. And the three of us lifted the top off. And as soon as we raised it about 8 inches or so, there was that line.
It was covered by this sinking down and this edge here obscuring that there was a middle section. And you'd be able to use the buttons that are here to activate a mechanism that is stored down inside the box that would be able to tilt or to be able to raise or lower this to match the comfortable height for the speaker. And when the Lectern arrived at Space Center Houston, unfortunately only part of that mechanism came along with it. So that's perhaps why it wasn't able to sit at the height that we're used to seeing in the photographs.
I think of there being two aha moments. That one was unexpected for sure when we found that line. The one that I was really looking forward to was in the photographs, there's these tight parallel lines of wood grain. There were things that I saw that were a little bit more than a coincidence. And it's very difficult to see that with all the coats of varnish that were on there. And I was dying to see what that looked like with the varnish off.
If I turned off the light and took out a black light, ultraviolet light, you could see the difference in all these surfaces. The wood surface without any varnish at all. This is the first layer of varnish in color. And then a much later varnish that we can see when the lights are on, which is much thicker and more reflective. Well, there's certainly a misalignment where this middle section had shifted, and you can see, look at the patterns here. Those and the diagonal on the solid wood right here, once you compare side by side with a photograph of the Lectern, match completely. They're perfect.
There was no doubt that top and bottom matched up the photographs at that point. And then going forward, it was just a matter of completing the work on the whole Lectern. Having that authenticity question, it made me mad at first, but it caused us to stop and focus on this right then and there. Now I want to go hug that person that questioned it, because this is one of the coolest projects that we ever worked on. You know, after all, it's a piece of furniture, but it was worth all the time that we put into it. And I get the question asked a lot of, so why do you go through extreme measures to take care of something? And all the objects that are here in our Space Center have stories to tell. And as long as we're here, our job is to preserve those artifacts so that people in the future, in another 30, 60 years from now, also have that privilege of being able to see the artifacts. As for this specific object, its story is about uniting the country to get everybody on board to go to the moon. This Lectern is a symbol of that moment. We talk about spacesuits and spaceships and tools and computers, but who knew this could be so exciting? And I'm was thrilled that it was questioned because it sure opened a lot of doors about its history.